The chamber of Apex Prime stretched high above the assembled delegates, its crystalline walls catching starlight from a dozen nearby systems and scattering it into patterns that danced. Across polished floors were representatives from 47 species sat in careful arrangement, according to protocols established. Over millennia of galactic cooperation, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood alone at the center of the vast circular room, her dark gray diplomatic uniform pressed and proper, her silver hair pulled back in the traditional style of Earth's diplomatic corps, and her face composed in that particular expression humans called professional neutrality, while inside her chest, her heart hammered against her ribs like it wanted to escape. The charges had been read aloud in 17 languages by the council speaker, a towering Vexler whose translation membranes quivered with each pronouncement. And Sarah had listened without interruption as they detailed humanity's crimes against proper galactic society, unauthorized interventions in border disputes between the Krev Dominion and the Talak Collective, unscheduled cultural exchange programs that violated the carefully maintained barriers between developing species and established civilizations, persistent disregard for proper emotional distance in diplomatic relations, and most damning of all, a pattern of behavior that the council termed reckless compassion. The Ethakal representative, a being Sarah had once called friend during late-night conversations about art and philosophy, would not meet her eyes now, their chromatic skin shifting through colors that Sarah's xenopsychology training identified as shame mixed with resignation. The motion stands before this council, the speaker announced, their voice resonating through translation devices worn by every delegate present, that humanity be removed from membership in the Galactic Council effective immediately, with a grace period of 30 standard days to withdraw all personnel, installations, and assets from council-regulated space. Sarah watched the voting display materialize in the air above the assembly, each species' decision appearing as a symbol in their native mathematical system, and she counted them without surprise. 41 in favor of expulsion, 3 abstentions. 3 opposed. The Ithacola had abstained. The motion carries, the speaker said, and the finality in those 3 words felt like the closing of a door that could never be reopened. Ambassador Chen, you are hereby notified that humanity's membership in this council is revoked. Does your government wish to make a statement? Every eye in the chamber focused on Sarah now, and she could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down like atmospheric pressure. They expected rage, perhaps, or threats about humanity's military capabilities, or desperate pleas for reconsideration, or at minimum, a passionate speech about injustice and immense. Short-sighted Nasira took a breath that felt like swallowing stones and spoke clearly. Into the silence, the United Earth Government thanks the Galactic Council for the opportunity to participate in this grand experiment of interspecies cooperation, she said, her voice steady despite everything. We have learned much from each of you. We have been honored to call many of you colleagues and some of you friends. We understand the Council's decision and will comply fully with all withdrawal requirements. We wish you all continued success and prosperity. The silence that followed her words felt somehow louder than any speech. The Drexel ambassador, whose people had fought alongside humans during the Outer Rim crisis just 5 years prior, shifted in their seat with a sound like grinding rocks. Uncomfortable with something they could not name, that is all? Sarah asked, turning toward the speaker. That is all, they confirmed. Clearly unsettled by the lack of drama, Sarah bowed once, a gesture of respect that incorporated elements from a dozen different species' customs, because humans had always been good at synthesis, at finding common ground, at building bridges, even when others preferred walls. Then she turned and walked toward the exit with measured steps that neither hurried nor lingered behind her. The council chamber erupted into discussion, voices overlapping in multiple languages as delegates processed what had just happened and what it meant. But Sarah did not look back in the corridor outside. Her small staff waited with faces that tried to remain professional, but showed cracks of emotion around the edges. Marcus Williams, her senior aide, opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah shook her head. Start the withdrawal protocols, she said quietly. Full compliance, no delays. I want us to be the most cooperative expelled member in Council history, Ambassador Marcus began. We knew this was coming, Sarah interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. They've been building toward it for months. We just make it easy for everyone, the news spread through Council space faster than light-speed communications should have allowed. Carried on quantum-entangled networks and traditional radio waves and everything in between. And everywhere humans received it the same way Sarah had delivered it, with quiet dignity and immediate compliance and station harmony. A joint research facility orbiting a neutron star where human scientists had worked alongside Qualion researchers for 8 years. Dr. Rebecca Torres began organizing the careful packing of equipment and the transfer of ongoing projects to her Qualion colleagues, who protested that surely there must be some exception for purely scientific cooperation council rules, Rebecca said with a sad smile, handing over her life's work on exotic matter interactions. But here, I've written notes on everything. All our techniques, all our hunches about where to look next. You'll do great things with this in the Deneb sector. Captain James Park received the withdrawal order while his ship, the USS Meridian, was on patrol along a pirate-heavy trade route. He plotted a course back to human space and sent notifications to the 17 merchant convoys currently operating under his protection umbrella that they would need to arrange alternative security. The Vrenti trader he'd saved from raiders just 2 weeks ago sent a message asking if he was in trouble. If there was anything they could do to help, just take care of yourself out there, James replied. Watch your sensors in the kilos belt and remember what I taught you about evasive patterns on the planet New Singapore, a thriving colony world that had been humanity's most successful terraforming project and a showcase for human council cooperation. Governor Lisa Zhang addressed a crowd of 30,000 humans and twice that many other species who had settled there under joint governance agreements. We have 30 days. Her voice carried across the public square and broadcast to every home and business. The treaties are clear. This is council space. We're guests who have overstayed are welcome. We'll begin organizing transportation and helping everyone find new situations at Kethfer. Family who ran a restaurant in the capital city protested tearfully that this was their home, that their children had been born here, that the human neighbors had become like extended family. We'll help you however we can, Lisa promised, knowing the words were inadequate, and who knows, maybe someday things will change across human installations in council space. The same scene played out 1,000 times. Quiet acknowledgement, immediate action, and a kind of gentle sadness that surprised those who had expected Angritha Human Embassy on Apex Prime. A beautiful building incorporating architectural elements from Earth's many cultures, plus respectful nods to the styles of other council species, began shutting down its operations with careful attention to detail. Staff packed files and forwarded ongoing cases to other species embassies who had agreed to take over human interests, and in the gardens that human groundskeepers had maintained with loving attention. Signs were posted offering the plants and landscaping designs to anyone who wanted them. Sarah spent her final week on Apex Prime writing personal letters to every ambassador she had worked with, thanking them for specific moments of cooperation or kindness. And she left small gifts in each embassy: books of human poetry, recordings of human music, photographs of shared moments. The YTHKAL ambassador found her on the last day in the embassy garden she had planted 5 years ago with seeds from Earth. I abstained, they said. Their skin showing colors of regret. I know, Sarah replied, running her fingers over the leaves of a rosemary plant that would soon need a new caretaker. I wanted to oppose it. But my government, you don't need to explain, Sarah said, and she meant it without bitterness. Politics is complicated. Loyalties are complicated. You did what you could. Will humanity ever forgive us? Ethekal asked. Sarah considered the question while watching a butterfly, a real Earth butterfly introduced to this garden as part of a xenobiology exchange. Dance between flowers. There's nothing to forgive, she said finally. You made a choice you thought was right. We respect that. We'll be fine. That's what frightens me, the Ethekal whispered. You're taking this too well, Sarah smiled, but did not answer on the 30th day. The last human ship departed council space right on schedule, leaving behind stations powered down but maintained, facilities transferred smoothly to other species, and 1,000 small kindnesses that would only be noticed in their absence. The council met an emergency session to discuss what came next, and nobody could explain why the chamber felt so much emptier despite being just as full as always. 3 months after the last human ship crossed out of council space, Ambassador Kethfer of the Quoyan delegation sat in his office reviewing trade reports and feeling a growing sense of unease that he could not quite name. Numbers on a screen should not carry emotional weight, but these did. Like watching a friend slowly sicken without obvious symptoms. Krevidalok mining dispute had erupted into violence. So quickly that the council's response teams were still filing incident reports when the death toll reached triple digits. 2 species arguing over mineral rights in an asteroid belt neither had really wanted until the other expressed interest. And normally this would have been resolved in a week of shuttle diplomacy and creative. Kompromissikithov remembered watching Ambassador Sarah Chen handle a similar dispute 4 years ago between the Vrenti and the Zolpar. She had suggested they auction the mining rights and split the proceeds. Then use that money to fund a joint research station studying the rare minerals they were fighting over. Both sides had left the negotiation feeling like they had won something. The council arbitrators had followed every protocol perfectly this time. They established jurisdiction, reviewed historical claims, consulted precedents, applied the relevant treaty frameworks, and issued a ruling that gave the Krev 60% of the disputed belt and the Talak the remainder. Based on complex calculations of prior use and strategic need, both sides had immediately declared the ruling unfair and withdrawn their ambassadors from each other's territories. Trade routes that had connected their economies for a century shut down overnight, and now there were shooting incidents along the border. As each side accused the other of claim jumping, the council had dispatched peacekeepers who sat between the combatants, filing reports about violations while doing nothing to address the underlying resentment because that was not in their operational mandate. Perhaps we could suggest mediation. Kethfer Said offered during a briefing. The ruling is final according to council law. Kethfer replied, hearing the hollowness in his own words. Mediation would undermine the arbitration system. His aides said nothing, but their expressions spoke volumes. It's about the difference between being legally correct and actually solving problems on the Vrin colony of Hesper's Landing. Colony Administrator Velkor stood in the medical center, watching doctors and nurses move between beds, filled with patients showing symptoms of crimson flux, a disease that should have been eradicated decades ago but had somehow mutated and returned with renewed virulence. Council medical ship had arrived on schedule exactly 14 days after the outbreak was reported through proper channels, and the medical team had established quarantine protocols with textbook precision. Before beginning their assessment of the situation, will need to file a priority request for vaccine shipments, the lead counsel, a physician explained. A Drexel, whose crystalline structure refracted the harsh medical lighting into rainbow patterns. That requires approval from the Central Medical Authority, which typically takes 6 to 8 weeks for Class 3 outbreaks. Weeks, Velkor repeated. Looking at the 37 patients currently in treatment, and knowing that more cases were being discovered. Everyday protocol for Class 3 outbreaks requires verification of mutation status, impact assessment, resource allocation, review, and clearance from... I know the protocols, Velkor interrupted, trying to keep frustration from his voice. Is there any way to expedite these protocols? Exist for good reason, the physician said. To prevent panic and ensure resources are distributed according to genuine need, rather than whoever requests loudest. Velkor nodded and returned to his office, where he pulled up old files from 5 years ago, when a different outbreak had struck a neighboring colony. The human medical ship had arrived within 48 hours, despite being 3 systems away. And the human doctors had not asked about protocols or filing procedures. They had simply started treating people, while simultaneously working with local staff to synthesize vaccines. You'll get in trouble for this, Velkor remembered saying to the human doctor, a young woman named Patricia, who had worked 30-hour shifts without complaint, probably. Patricia had agreed while calibrating a gene sequencer. But people are sick now, not after the paperwork clears. We'll deal with consequences later. The human ship had stayed until the outbreak was contained. then left with just a wave and a request that Velcor send them the final data for their medical database. Pulled up current statistics. 17 deaths so far. Projected to reach over 200 before vaccines arrived through proper channels. He closed the file and tried to focus on other matters. In the financial district of Apex Prime, economic analyst Thexan presented his findings to a hastily assembled committee of council economic advisors. And the graphs he displayed told a story that made experienced financiers shift uncomfortably in their seats. The galactic market has experienced a 12% contraction over the past quarter, Vexon explained, highlighting sections of his data. This represents the largest single-quarter decline in 200 years of recorded council economic history. What's causing it? Demanded the committee chair. That's the interesting part, Vexon said, pulling up correlation analyses. No single factor explains it. Instead, we're seeing increased volatility across all sectors simultaneously. Markets that used to trend stable are now experiencing wild swings. And traditional economic models are failing to predict behavior. He paused before continuing, knowing his next words would be unwelcome. The only significant variable that changed in our economic equation was the removal of human trading networks. The committee chair's expression suggested he had just been told the station's life support was failing. Humans represented less than 8% of total trade volume, someone objected. They couldn't possibly have this much impact. It's not about volume, Dexon explained. Pulling up new charts, it's about timing and distribution. Human traders had this unusual pattern of buying during market panics and selling during bubbles, essentially doing the opposite of what standard economic theory predicts. And they formed these vast networks of relationship-based trading that moved resources to where they were needed rather than where profit margins were highest. That's just bad business, the objector insisted, and yet it stabilized markets, Vexan countered, like a shock absorber in a ground vehicle. They weren't moving the economy forward, but they were preventing it from shaking itself apart. The committee ordered further study, but Dexon could see in their faces that they already knew what he would find. The humans had been performing a function no one had appreciated until it stopped in the outer reaches, a region of space where council authority grew thin and piracy grew thick. A distress beacon activated from a small courier ship carrying mail and medicine to isolated colonies. The automated message repeated every 30 seconds. This is the courier vessel, Distant Hope. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. Requesting immediate assistance, 7 crew aboard, life support failing. Please respond. The message bounced through relay stations and eventually reached Council Security Command, where it was logged, categorized, and assigned a priority rating based on strategic importance of the ship, cargo value, and species of crew involved. The courier was registered to an Ethakal minor trading company. Cargo was classified as low-value essentials, and the outer reaches were designated as a minimal strategic. Priority zone response time, 11 days. Message continued broadcasting for 6 hours before falling silent 3 weeks later. A council patrol found the courier drifting. Life support had failed after 9 hours, and all 7 crew were dead. The investigation report noted that the ship had been looted but not destroyed, suggesting pirates operating in the area. The report was filed and added to statistics. A junior officer named Saxeth, who had once trained alongside human security personnel, looked at the file and remembered something a human instructor had said. During their academy days, every beacon is someone's worst day. You don't get to pick which ones matter. Human patrol ships used to sweep the outer reaches on irregular schedules, appearing randomly, responding to every beacon, regardless of strategic value. And the pirates had hated it because they never knew when a human cruiser might drop out of. Faster than light travel with weapons hot and mercy in short supply. We could request increased patrols in that sector, Saxeth suggested to his commanding officer outside our scheduled rotation. The commander replied, and we don't have the ships to spare. File it as a recommendation for next quarter's strategic review. Saxeth filed the report and watched it disappear into the same bureaucratic void that had swallowed the distress beacon in Apex Prime. The Council's Department of Cultural Affairs noticed an unusual trend in their data. Applications for interspecies cultural exchange programs had dropped by 40%, and several ongoing programs were being canceled or allowed to expire without renewal director. Velcor pulled up historical records and found that humans had been participants or organizers in nearly 60% of all cultural exchanges. And their withdrawal had created a cascade effect as other species, who had been involved primarily because humans made it interesting, began to lose enthusiasm. 8 months had passed since humanity's quiet departure, and Kethfer sat in his office, surrounded by data that told a story nobody wanted to hear. Numbers and statistics that added up to a conclusion so uncomfortable that the council had rejected his preliminary reports 3 times already, asking for recalculation and verification as if checking the math would change the fundamental. Truth underneath economic activity across council space had declined by 34%. Violent conflicts between member species had increased by 127%. Average medical emergency response times had tripled from their historical norms. And scientific publications, emerging from council institutions, had fallen by 45%, but the raw numbers could not capture the texture of what was happening. The subtle ways that council space felt different now, colder somehow. Like walking into a home where the family had recently suffered a loss, and everyone was being very polite about not mentioning Id Kethfer, had spent the last 2 months traveling between council stations and member worlds, conducting interviews and gathering qualitative data to accompany his statistical analysis, and everywhere he went, he heard the same sentiments expressed in different ways. Something was missing, something they had not realized mattered until it was gone in Research Station Kepler 7. A joint scientific facility orbiting a black hole where teams studied exotic physics, he spoke with Dr. Quenix, a Drexel physicist whose crystalline structure pulsed with agitated colors as she explained the problem. Human scientists ask stupid questions, she said, pulling up old research logs. It would interrupt our theoretical discussions with these naive inquiries that demonstrated fundamental misunderstanding of the principles involved. And we would patiently explain why their questions made no sense. And then somehow, that would lead to breakthrough insights. She displayed a research paper that had won the Council's highest scientific honor 3 years prior, a collaboration between Drexel theorists and human experimentalists. That had revolutionized understanding of quantum entanglement across galactic distances. This paper emerged from a human technician, asking if we had tried turning the equipment off and on again, Quenix said, her colors showing embarrassment mixed with reluctant admiration. Such a simple, stupid question. But it made us reconsider our baseline assumptions, and we discovered we had been making an error in our theoretical framework for decades. Can't other species ask stupid questions? Kethfer inquired. They could, Quenix agreed, but they don't. Everyone is too concerned with appearing knowledgeable, demonstrating expertise, maintaining their species' reputation for intelligence. Humans didn't seem to care if they looked foolish. They just wanted to understand. And that made them safe to collaborate with. She gestured at the empty laboratory spaces where human researchers had once worked. Now everyone protects their own research, shares only through formal publications, collaborates only within species groups to avoid appearing inferior, she continued. It's all very proper and professional and completely sterile. Kethfer added her comments to his growing file of interviews in the Deneb sector, where piracy had become a significant threat to commercial shipping. He spoke with Captain Vrentel of a merchant vessel that had been attacked twice in the past month. The Council's security forces patrol on schedule, the captain explained, showing Kethfer his shipping logs. Every 3rd day they sweep through designated trade routes, very efficient, very predictable, and the pirates know exactly when and where they'll be. He pulled up incident reports, showing a pattern. Attacks occurred in the windows between security patrols. In the dead zones where Council ships were guaranteed not to be human patrols were random, Vrentel said. You never knew when one of their ships might appear. Could be twice in one day, or not for a week, but they were always somewhere unexpected. And they responded to every distress call, regardless of whether it was in their patrol zone that's inefficient, Kethfer observed. Wasted fuel and resources covering areas randomly, sure, the captain agreed, but the pirates couldn't predict them. And that made every route safer, because any route might have humans on it. Now we know exactly where we're protected and where we're not. And so do the raiders. The captain showed Kethfer a small statue he kept on his ship's bridge. A human figure in a military uniform that had been a gift from Captain Park of the USS Meridian. He saved my ship and my crew from raiders 4 years ago, Rental said quietly. Appeared out of nowhere, drove them off. Helped us repair our engines, and then stayed with us until we reached safe port. Didn't ask for payment, didn't file paperwork. Just said he was glad everyone was okay. The captain's expression carried a weight of loss that Kethfer recognized from too many other interviews on the planet Hesper's landing. Valcor took Kethfer to the colony cemetery where 217 fresh graves marked the cost of proper procedure. The Crimson Flux outbreak had been contained eventually. After the vaccines had been properly approved and distributed through appropriate channels, but the death toll had been catastrophic. Council medical protocols are designed to prevent waste and ensure equitable distribution, Valcor said, standing among the graves. No one can argue they're unfair, because everyone receives exactly the same treatment according to precisely calculated need. He gestured at the memorial markers, each one representing someone's family member, friend, colleague. Person who had died while waiting for equity human doctors would have been here in days. Maybe hours, he continued. They would have started treatment immediately. Synthesized vaccines in their shipboard labs, shared everything freely. And then they would have gotten in trouble with their own bureaucracy for exceeding their authority. Did they get in trouble often? Kethfer asked constantly. Velcor replied with something that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob, and they never seemed to care. They just filed their reports and apologized and promised to follow proper procedure next time. And then the next emergency would happen, and they would ignore procedure. Again, because people needed help. Kethfer recorded the interview and added, the death statistics to his growing report. The council had become a machine that ran perfectly but produced nothing anyone needed back on Apex Prime. Kethfer compiled his findings into a comprehensive report that he knew would be rejected again. But he felt obligated to try. The numbers told part of the story, but the real insight was in the qualitative data. In the texture of loss that permeated council space, he titled the report, The Hidden Cost of Efficiency, and included a section that he expected would be particularly controversial. An analysis of what he termed emotional labor in maintaining galactic civilization. Humans had performed countless tasks that appeared in no official capacity. No job description, no treaty obligation. They organized informal gatherings between species, who were technically at peace, but practically avoided each other. They remembered birthdays and cultural celebrations of colleagues from other species. They sent congratulations when someone's research was published or their child graduated. They showed up at funerals and weddings and hospital rooms, and none of it was required. None of it appeared in any diplomatic framework, and all of it had maintained the invisible web of personal connections that made the formal structures of the council actually function without it. The council still operated, but the operations felt mechanical, like a body whose nervous system had been damaged. All the parts still moved, but there was no coordination, no grace, no sense that the whole was greater than its components. Var presented his report to a special council session and watched their faces as they processed information. They did not want to accept your suggesting we expelled humanity because they were too friendly, the speaker summarized, their tone suggesting disbelief. I'm suggesting we expelled them because their approach to galactic civilization was fundamentally different from ours, Kethfer replied. They treated the council as a community rather than an institution, and when we demanded they maintain proper institutional distance, they complied by leaving. Then they should have adapted to our standards. Someone argued they tried, Kethfer said, pulling up documentation of dozens of human diplomatic initiatives that had been rejected over the years for being too informal, too emotional, too personal. Every time they tried to adapt, we told them they were still too human. So eventually they took us at our word and went home. The council debated his findings for hours, arguments circling through the same points. Humans had violated protocols. Humans had been warned repeatedly. Humans had made their choice to leave rather than conform. and the current problems would resolve themselves. Once other species adapted to fill the gaps humans had left, Kethver listened and took notes and wondered if they actually believed what they were saying after the session. Ambassador Ithkar found him in the corridor outside the chamber. "Your report was very thorough," she said, her chromatic skin showing colors of profound sadness. "Will it change anything?" "No," Kethver admitted, "but I had to try." 12 months after humanity's departure, the Council authorized a formal diplomatic mission to negotiate their return, and the delegation assembled on Apex Prime included representatives from 8 major species plus Kethver as the mission's lead analyst, and Ambassador Ithkar, who had insisted on participating despite her governance. Growing skepticism about the entire endeavor, the delegation traveled to what had been the human embassy, hoping to find forwarding information or contact protocols, and discovered the building exactly as humans had left it, maintained but empty. Lights on timers that created the illusion of occupation, gardens still thriving through automated care systems that humans had installed before departing standing. In the central atrium, where Sarah Chen had once hosted informal gatherings that somehow accomplished more than formal negotiations, Ithkar found a small envelope with her name written in Sarah's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a note. "Thank you for being brave enough to abstain. I know what it cost you. The roses in the garden were always your favorite, so I left instructions for their care. I hope whoever takes this space will appreciate them as much as you did, Sarah." Ithkar folded the note carefully and placed it in her personal files next to the hate messages she had been collecting. The delegation searched through embassy records and found meticulous documentation of the withdrawal, every asset accounted for, every ongoing project transferred to other species with detailed notes, every relationship carefully concluded with expressions of goodwill, and they found a simple forwarding address: Sol System, Earth, humanity's homeworld. The journey to Sol took 2 weeks through established jump points, and the delegation spent the time preparing arguments and offers, calculating what concessions they could make, what guarantees they could provide, what inducements might convince humanity to reconsider. They emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Sol System and immediately encountered something unexpected. Warning buoys broadcasting on all standard frequencies, "Welcome to Sol System." The automated message announced in 17 languages, including all major council tongues, "This space is under the sovereign jurisdiction of the United Earth Government. Former council species are welcome as tourists with proper visas issued through standard immigration channels. Diplomatic missions require advance authorization through formal application process. Please respect our borders and enjoy your visit." The message was polite, professional, and absolutely firm in a way that made clear humanity was no longer interested in the informal cooperation that had once characterized their participation in galactic society. They bureaucratized themselves. The Drexel delegate observed with something that might have been approval or might have been irony. "They're speaking our language," Kethver corrected, "showing us what it feels like to be on the other side of proper procedure." The delegation filed the required applications and waited 3 days for processing before receiving authorization to dock at Luna Station, a massive orbital facility that served as humanity's primary interface with non-human visitors. The station was beautiful in the way human architecture often was, combining functionality with aesthetic considerations that most species considered wasteful, and everywhere the delegation looked, they saw evidence of human activity. Ships coming and going, construction projects expanding the station, families walking through public areas, and most noticeably, no aliens. "Where are all the other species?" someone asked. "We're in the diplomatic sector. YTHKA, our replied. Checking the station directory, there are tourist areas where other species are allowed, but humans seem to have separated their space rather deliberately. It was like looking at a mirror of the Council's own policies. About maintaining appropriate distance between species, they were escorted to a meeting room that overlooked Earth, that beautiful blue and green planet that humans had left millennia ago to spread across the stars, in which they had apparently been restoring to something resembling its pre-industrial ecological states. Akalaja Chen entered the room, looking older than when they had last seen her. Her hair completely white now, and her face carrying lines that suggested the past year had not been easy. But her eyes held the same calm assessment that had made her such an effective negotiator, Ambassador Chen. The delegation's speaker began, using her old title out of respect. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I'm retired from diplomatic service," Sarah replied, gesturing for them to sit. "But I agreed to this meeting as a courtesy. Would anyone like tea?" The offer was so quintessentially human, so perfectly ordinary, that it threw the delegation's carefully prepared opening completely off course. They accepted and spent 10 minutes in small talk while Sarah prepared tea with the kind of attention to detail that suggested the ritual mattered more than efficiency. "You've been missed," Ithkar said finally. "Unable to maintain diplomatic pretense, the council is falling apart without you." Sarah's expression showed sympathy, but no surprise as she poured tea into delicate cups that were probably worth less than the treaty documents the delegation had brought, but were being treated with more care. "I've been following the news," she admitted. "Kethra, I read your reports. They were very thorough. Then you understand why we're here," the speaker said. Diving into their prepared presentation, the council recognizes that perhaps we were hasty in our decision. We would like to negotiate humanity's return to full membership with enhanced status, a permanent council seat with veto power, priority in trade negotiations, and guaranteed autonomy in your diplomatic practices. Sarah listened while sipping her tea, and her silence was more unsettling than any argument. "We're prepared to make significant concessions," the speaker continued, "including formal apologies, revision of the protocols that led to friction, and substantial economic incentives." "That's very generous," Sarah said when the presentation concluded, her tone suggesting she meant it without being swayed by it. "May I speak candidly, please?" Kethfer urged. Sarah set down her teacup with care and looked at each delegation member in turn. "You didn't expel us because we were dangerous or incompetent," she began, her voice gentle but unflinching. "You expelled us because we made you uncomfortable, because we cared too much and that felt inappropriate, because we treated your losses like they mattered to us personally and your victories like they were ours to celebrate, because we looked at your children and saw people we wanted to protect rather than future diplomatic assets." She stood and walked to the window overlooking Earth. "We grieved when your people died. We celebrated when your scientists made breakthroughs. We remembered birthdays and cultural festivals and family situations, and all of that was labeled as violation of proper diplomatic distance," she continued. "You wanted partners who maintained professional boundaries, who could cooperate without connection, who could work together without actually caring about each other. We were wrong," Ithkar said quietly. "We see that now. You were right according to your values," Sarah corrected. "You wanted an institution, and we kept trying to make it a community. Those are fundamentally incompatible visions, and when you forced a choice, we chose to leave rather than pretend we could be something we're not." She returned to the table and pulled a data chip from her pocket. "This contains everything we learned about council species during our time in the galactic community," she said, sliding it across the table. "Medical research, cultural studies, tactical analysis, economic models, everything. We're returning it because it's your information about your peoples, and we have no right to keep it." "We didn't come here for data," the speaker protested. "I know," Sarah agreed. "You came for us to come back and fix everything. But we can't, and we won't. Not because we're angry or bitter, but because we're tired." She looked at Ithkar with real affection. "We spent 50 years trying to be part of your council, trying to adapt to your ways while maintaining our essential nature, getting reprimanded for caring too much, for helping too quickly, for forming friendships instead of alliances. And eventually we understood that what you called our flaws, we considered our strengths. So you'll never rejoin?" Kethfer asked. "Already knowing the answer, never is a long time," Sarah replied, "but not in the foreseeable future. We're focusing on ourselves for a while, exploring inward instead of outward. Maybe we'll rejoin the galaxy someday on different terms. Or maybe we won't. Either way, it's our choice now." The delegation sat in silence, processing the polite but absolute rejection. "What should we do?" Ithkar asked. The question emerging raw and honest. Sarah smiled with genuine warmth. Whatever you think is right, she said. Build the council you want to live in. Make it formal and efficient, if that's what serves you best. Or make it something else if you discover you want different things. But don't do it for us. Don't try to be more human because you think that will bring us back. She refilled everyone's teacups. The gesture automatic and caring, we learned a lot from you too, she continued. The Drexel taught us about patience. The Qualian about precision. The Ithakal about honor. Every species contributed something to who we became, and we're grateful for all of it. 5 years had passed since humanity quietly departed from council space, and the galaxy had settled into new patterns that resembled the old ones the way a scar resembles. The original skin. Functional, but fundamentally altered. Carrying memory of trauma in its very structure, the council still met on Apex Prime in that same crystalline chamber. Still followed the same protocols. Still maintained the institutional frameworks that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. But everyone who worked there could feel the absence, like a musical performance, where one instrument was missing and every other musician had to adjust. They're playing to compensate for the gap economic stability had returned to something approaching historical norms, but the markets remained more volatile than they had been, responding to shocks with wild swings that required constant intervention to prevent cascade failures, the invisible shock absorption that human traders had provided through their relationship networks and counterintuitive market behavior was simply gone. And council economists had developed complex automated systems to try to replicate it with mixed success. Medical response times had improved from their worst point 18 months prior, but never returned to what they had been. The council had reformed some protocols to allow faster deployment in genuine emergencies, though every reform had required extensive debate about where to draw the line between efficiency and equity, between saving lives quickly and ensuring fair treatment across all species. We're better at responding to crises now. Medical Director Vexen reported to the council. We've cut average response time by 40% through streamlined authorization procedures. Nobody mentioned that even with the improvement, responses were still twice as slow as they had been when human medical ships were part of the network's scientific collaboration had partially recovered through the creation of formal exchange programs designed to encourage cross-species research. But the breakthroughs came less frequently, the innovations felt more incremental, and researchers who remembered the old days spoke wistfully about the creative chaos that had existed. When humans were asking their stupid questions and accidentally revolutionizing entire fields, were doing good work. Dr. Quenix told her research team, solid, methodical, publishable work. The words fell flat because everyone knew the difference between good work and great work, between steady progress and paradigm shift spiracy in the outer reaches had been partially addressed through increased security budgets and better coordination between member species defense forces, but the random sweeps that had made pirates nervous were gone, replaced by predictable patrol patterns that professionals could work around. Captain Viaran Tal had survived 3 more attacks in 5 years and had learned to navigate by plotting courses that stayed within council security zones, accepting that large portions of space were simply too dangerous to transit along. The statue of Captain Park still held a place of honor on his bridge butt. The most significant change was not in any specific metric or system. It was in the texture of council civilization itself, in the way species related to each other when institutional necessity didn't require interaction. The Ithakala had been the first to leave, announcing their withdrawal from the council 2 years after humanity's departure, and they had been followed by the Vrenti and the Zolpar, 3 species that had been deeply influenced by human culture and philosophy, that had learned to value exploration over conquest, cooperation over competition, and compassion over protocol. They formed what they called the Compact of Free Worlds, a loose alliance that explicitly rejected the formal hierarchies and rigid procedures of the council in favor of what they termed relationship-based governance. We're not trying to build an institution, Ambassador Ithkar explained during the Compact's founding ceremony, her chromatic skin displaying colors of hope mixed with determination. We're trying to build a community. We learn from the humans that these are different things requiring different approaches. The compact established principles that would have been familiar to anyone who had worked with humans. Respond to requests for help without waiting for proper authorization. Share resources based on need rather than strategic value. Maintain cultural exchange programs even when they weren't economically productive. And most controversially, make decisions based on what seemed right, rather than what protocol required. Council watched this development with mixed feelings, ranging from contempt for what they viewed as naive idealism to envy for something they couldn't quite name. They'll collapse within a year, some council members predicted. You can't run a civilization on feelings. The compact did not collapse. It grew slowly but steadily as other species, particularly smaller ones who felt marginalized by council hierarchies, applied for membership. And while it faced challenges and made mistakes, it maintained a kind of resilience that came from genuine commitment rather than institutional inertia. Coffer, still serving as a council analyst despite opportunities elsewhere, watched the compact's development with fascination and produced reports that nobody wanted to read about why it was working. The answer was uncomfortable. The compact was succeeding precisely because it prioritized connection over efficiency, because member species actually cared about each other's well-being rather than just their strategic value, because they were willing to be inefficient if inefficiency meant being kind. Council had perfected the machinery of governance, but the compact was building something that felt alive in Earth. Humanity observed these developments through the detailed monitoring systems they maintained throughout the galaxy. And in policy discussions within the United Earth government, there were debates about whether to engage with the compact, whether to offer support or advice or simple acknowledgement. They're trying to be us, some argued. We should help them, they're trying to be themselves, others countered. We should let them figure it out, Sarah Chen, now teaching Xena diplomacy at the University of Luna to students who had never met an alien in person, used the compact as a case study in how cultures evolve through contact and synthesis. The Ethekal aren't copying humanity, she explained to her class, displaying footage of the compact's founding. They're taking ideas they learned from us and combining them with their own traditions and values to create something new. That's what cultural exchange is supposed to do. It's not about one species converting others. It's about everyone becoming richer through exposure to different perspectives. But we're not part of it, student observed. Doesn't that seem wrong? We're part of it, Sarah corrected, just not directly. We influence the Ethekal, who influence the Vrenti, who influence the Zolpar. And now they're creating something that will influence others? Culture spreads like ripples in water. And you can't always see the stone that caused them. Earth itself had undergone significant changes during humanity's period of isolation. With resources and attention previously directed toward galactic engagement, now focused inward, there had been massive investments in ecological restoration, cultural renaissance, scientific research into purely human questions, and a kind of collective healing from the long effort of trying to bridge multiple civilizations. The planet was greener than it had been in millennia. Artistic movements flourished without concern for how they would translate to alien aesthetics, and philosophical discussions explored questions about human nature without needing to contextualize them for species who might find the entire framework incomprehensible. We needed this, Sarah told her students, needed time to remember who we are when we're not trying to be acceptable to everyone else. Needed space to process the pain of rejection without pretending it didn't hurt. Needed permission to focus on ourselves without guilt. Will we ever rejoin the galaxy? Students asked her, regularly probably. Sarah always replied, but differently on our terms, when we're ready. And maybe to the compact instead of the council. Or maybe to both. Or maybe we'll create something entirely new. The future is wonderfully uncertain in the outer reaches. A Vryn colony world called Hespers. Landing activated a distress beacon as a new outbreak of crimson flux emerged despite all precautions. The disease had mutated again, and the colony's medical resources were overwhelmed within days. Council Medical Fleet received the notification and began their response protocols, verification of outbreak severity, assessment of resource allocation priorities, calculation of response timelines. Estimated arrival, 23 days in, the same region. The human hospital ship Mercy's Call was conducting routine medical surveys of isolated colonies, part of humanity's new policy of providing humanitarian assistance in non-council space without requiring formal agreements or institutional frameworks. Ship's sensors picked up the distress beacon, and Captain Dr. Elizabeth Okonkwo reviewed the information with her senior staff. That's the same colony that lost 200 people 5 years ago, her medical officer observed. Pulling up historical records, council protocols killed them while they waited for proper authorization.